Episode 187 of the Interpretation Station is called to order. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to all of my fans, subscribers, whatever, who have interpreters, translators even, with Chinese in their combination. This is a special episode, guys, that we have for you today. I am joined again by one of my best buddies here who helps me on all the Chinese episodes, Zoe Qian. How are you, Zoe?
Good. I'm doing quite well. Yeah, thank you. How are you? You're on holiday, right?
I'm on holiday. I'm on my long summer holiday of about 6 weeks. I'm about 4 weeks in. I've got two and a half weeks left. So the idea of work is starting to return, unfortunately. I can see it in the distance. But anyway, even though I'm on holiday, I'm still here to make episodes for the Interpretation Station. And we have got a special episode for you today, all you Chinese interpreters. So you may have seen already in the past, I did a 3-part sort of special, if you like, on the Sustainable Development Goals, where I went through the goals, picking out the main vocab in the 17 SDGs. Now, those 3 episodes, they were more, I guess, focused on working with the French and Spanish versions, because that's what I use most, but a bit with the Russian. So really not, I don't know any Chinese, okay? I must admit, hands up, I don't know any Chinese. However, I do have a lot of knowledge. I've worked at these things. And so with the help of Zoe, we can basically try and enlighten you, improve your knowledge, so that you know exactly what things you should focus on if you want to work at, for example, if you want to try and work at the UN, if you ever think about taking UN tests, in fact, working anywhere within international organizations. So hopefully these episodes can be of help to you. Me and Zoe have made, by the way, 9-10 episodes covering things like the UN Charter, covering big-ish topics of the day, the situation in Ukraine, situation in North Korea. So you can go and watch those in the playlist that I will be linking to. Anyway, but back to today's episode. So for this episode on the SDGs, this is going to be entirely devoted to you Chinese speakers. And we're going to have to do it in 2 parts because there's quite a lot of material in those 17 SDGs. So we're going to be breaking down SDGs 1 to 9 today. I will be pointing in the direction of the, as I say, the important vocab, and Zoe will be here to basically, to give us those Chinese solutions, and we'll be looking at, what are the main themes that you should be concentrating on. Also, what sort of scenarios you might run into this kind of vocab. I can sort of tell you that because I know pretty well under what circumstances you're likely to come across this sort of stuff. So, Zoe, without much further ado, no hanging around today because I'm using my father-in-law's internet, and it's I think it's prepaid, so I need to be very economical with my time. Otherwise, I'm going to be in trouble. So Zoe, let's get started. Let's go at SDG 1. How do we say the Sustainable Development Goals in Chinese?
可持续发展目标.
Okay. Any acronym involved there?
Yes, because there's SDG and in simultaneous, it's just way too fast. And you can't just say 可持续发展目标. I've heard 2 versions, 可持发目标 and 持发目标. So a bit shorter, at least.
Okay. Yeah. And these, of course, the SDGs were adopted, if I'm right in saying, was it 2010? So these sort of superseded what came before, which were the Millennium Development Goals, the MDG. So it's good to know those 2. If you may hear, the MDGs are still quoted in certain contexts, so you want to be able to recognize MDGs and SDGs. And what were the MDGs in Chinese?
I think it's called 千禧年发展目标, but let me double check.
Okay.
千年发展目标. Yeah, it's 千年发展目标. Yeah.
Okay. And now these goals, they are made up. There's the goal itself, and then they're broken down into the targets. Each goal has a target. Has a number of targets, actually, and for each target you have indicators. a way of measuring whether the target has been met. So targets and indicators, how do we say those in Chinese?
So target in Chinese, at least for SDG, it's called 具体目标. So literally specific goals in Chinese. And indicators, to be honest, I haven't seen any like Chinese speeches mention indicators. They kind of ignore those indicators. But if you need to translate that, that would be 指标.
Okay. All right, well, let's start from number 1, shall we? Go to SDG number 1.
Just loading. So this is the page that you want.
Okay,
right?
That's it. That's good. Okay, so goal number 1, you'll see up there, is no poverty. End poverty in all its forms everywhere. Sometimes you'll see it as also being eradicating poverty. So that's a good, by the way, when going into English, that's a good collocation to have. Poverty eradication, eradicating poverty. You know, that might impress, let's say you're doing an exam and an examiner hears you saying that. It's always, you know, that can impress an examiner when you know the right collocations. It's a minor detail, okay? I mean, maybe you say eliminate poverty. But if you say eradicate poverty, you might run into the examiner who actually says, oh, yeah, that is the right, you know, the right collocation. Just as like with terrorism, you don't really you can combat terrorism, but what's even better is to counter terrorism. So it shows like an in-depth knowledge of the issues that might just give you the edge. So yeah. Okay, so Zoe, if you now open up goal number 1. In fact, what we'll do is, there we have the English. So this is the English version. So as you see how the targets are broken up, 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, etc. And what Zoe's going to do now, she is going to show you the Chinese version. Now, I'm not going to go through every single target. Okay, in that series of 3 that I did, I pretty much read through all the targets and indicators. It was very methodical. My 3 episodes were very methodical. This time, I'm just going to focus on that vocabulary, those figures, statistics that I feel are the most important for you, so as you don't just fall asleep. So I'm going to very much keep it focused on what's most important. So if you could just bring up the Chinese versions.
Before that, I actually want to ask a question. So what's the difference between target 1.1, 1.2 and like target 1A, 1B?
I think the 1As, I think they were added subsequently. I think I can't give you a firm answer on that. Right. My feeling is that they were added subsequently.
Are you seeing the Chinese version?
Okay, so there we have the Chinese version. So the first thing I want to stop on is starting on target on goal 1.1, okay, which in English reads, by 2030, eradicate extreme poverty for all people everywhere, currently measured as people living on less than $1.25 a day. Now, the 2 things I want to bring up here. Well, by the way, yeah. So the idea is that all these goals are going to be achieved by 2030. Okay, that's one thing. Remember, that's all. You know, it's all in the context of Agenda 2030 and all that sort of thing. So I was going to say about eradicating poverty. That's a very good collocation. In Chinese, what's the sort of main collocation for eradicating poverty?
So it's
yeah.
Okay, great. Okay. So to eradicate poverty or to end poverty, it's actually the same in Chinese. So just 消除贫困, 消除贫困, it's the same.
Okay. And the other thing I wanted to pick out from that target was just sometimes it's good to know these figures, okay? People living on less than $1.25 a day. It's just useful, you know, if you're in a meeting, you get, you know, the economists up there, and it's just good to know what their benchmark is for measuring poverty, okay? So it seems here that as far as the UN is concerned, that it is $1.25 a day. I got a feeling it used to be $1 a day.
Yeah, that's what I recall as well.
Right, and now they've raised it to 125. I don't know if
inflation
that is in order.
As well.
It's also to inflate the numbers of people in poverty. I don't know, but anyway, that's the UN figure for poverty, $1.25. Now, moving on, target 1.2. Implement nationally appropriate social protection systems and measures for all, including floors. Now, I was interested to know what the Chinese for flaws are? I have heard this expression.
Sorry, just want to correct. That's actually target 1.3.
Was it target 1.3? My apologies.
So flaws in Chinese is 最低标准, literally the lowest standard.
Okay, so that's basically what that is. And so in English, you will hear speakers talking about the flaws, the very minimum sort of acceptable level. Okay. Now we're going to move on to 1.4.2. Okay, now
actually here.
Okay, there we go. Indicate 1.4.2. Now, what the interesting vocab here is secure tenure rights to land. This is an important thing to be able to know from English and also going into English. The idea of tenure, the ownership of land, that is the sort of buzz expression. Now, is there anything special for that in Chinese?
So in Chinese is 土地保有权, meaning ownership of land.
Okay, so it's pretty much the sort of regular word for ownership. They'll talk about in, often in Africa, issues in Africa about women having, the right to tenure, having the right to own their land. That's, for example, a big issue. Then moving on to 1.5. Okay, building resilience of the poor. Resilience, very important word in English, in English, in UNEs. I don't really use resilience much myself in regular, everyday chit chat, but they do like resilience at the UN. What is the word for resilience?
So the resilience, the translation for resilience here is actually quite different from resilience in other contexts in UN. So here it's more specific. It's called 抵御灾害能力. So the ability to defend themselves against disasters. Natural disasters.
So there's more words involved.
Yes, this is very, very specific because I guess in 1.5, we're talking about climate-related extreme events. But in a more general context, resilience would be 韧性 in the UN context as well, but a more general one.
Okay. And then this idea also exposure and vulnerability to climate-related extreme events, the idea of it being of exposure. How's that rendered in Chinese?
Right. It's not a direct translation. Here it's 其遭受极端天气事件. So 遭受, that's kind of to encounter.
Okay.
Yeah.
Shock. So in English, if you're going into English, I mean, this is maybe a bit more relevant, if you go into French, because they say in French, les chocs externes. But in English, we talk about external shocks, which again, to a native English speaker like me, doesn't sound quite right in English, but that has just become the sort of accepted English vocab, the UN vocab, sort of exposure to external shocks. Is there anything particular with that in Chinese? What's the word for that?
Just shocks?
Shocks, yeah.
冲击, I think that's all right. It's more like a direct translation from English.
Okay. They often about well, here it's economic, social, environmental, external. They often about external shocks. That's how would they say external shocks? 外部冲击.
So that's also a very direct translation. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Then 1.5.2.
Let's see if it's 1.5.2 is not here, but the numbering is wrong. This is indicator 1.5.3. So 1.5.3 is here, 1.5.2 is not here.
Okay. So do we have direct economic loss attributed to disasters in relation to global gross domestic product?
It's not here, but I can give you my translation.
Because you'll see that if you go to the SDGs page, this is the problem, is the other languages sort of lag behind the English version of the SDGs. You'll see, unfortunately, that when you go to the page, they don't tally in the different languages because the English is the most sort of updated, obviously. That's the one they changed first. And the French and Spanish aren't far behind. But then I know the Russian one lags quite a bit, and Zoe, apparently the Chinese one is lagging quite a bit as well, is it?
Yeah. unfortunately.
That's a bit. So it's a bit slightly annoying. But where did you find the best version for the viewers?
So this is the best version that I've found. This is from the UN library.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so we'll leave the link to that in the description box, okay, for all you guys, so you can go and find it yourself, right? You don't need a password for you. This was just public.
No, because I don't have any password.
Yeah, right. Okay. So anyway, what I was going to say, so 1.5.2 that seems to be missing from this version. Is economic loss attributed to disasters in relation to global gross domestic product. Gross domestic product, GDP. You need to be able to spot that in English. What's that in Chinese?
国内生产总值, but you can just say GDP. To be honest.
Oh, you can say just GDP.
Yeah.
Okay. Then we want 1.5.3.
It's here. The number is wrong.
Oh, that's the numbering is long. Okay.
Yeah, the numbering is wrong.
So this one is
right.
This is to do with natural disasters.
Yes.
What a very important mechanism, if you like, in the context of natural disasters, which I believe was adopted after the earthquake, the Fukushima earthquake, it's called the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, 2015-2030. How would you say that in Chinese?
So it's here. 2015到2030年仙台减少灾害风险框架.
Okay, so disaster risk reduction is something that does get raised quite a lot. Okay, then 1B, I was just interested anything. So in pro-poor and gender-sensitive development strategies, I thought this was sort of
right.
Interesting wording, shall we say? How is that put into Chinese?
Yeah, so the Chinese is a bit long. It's not as succinct as English. 惠及贫困人口, so that's pro-poor. Gender sensitive is 顾及性别平等问题.
Okay, gender sensitive is obviously comes up a lot in virtually all contexts. Pro-poor, I thought it was quite a nice succinct way of putting the idea, which I might otherwise take more words to reflect, but pro-poor is very snappy. So this is the kind of stuff that economists, they're going to come to the UN, they're going to give statements, and they're going to use this kind of language. So you need to be able to recognize it and to have ready-made solutions as you're going along. Going on. Okay, let's go now. If you bring up the English version, we're now moving to goal 2. So goal 2, zero hunger. And then,
this is still goal 1.
Okay, so end hunger, achieve food security and improve nutrition and promote sustainable agriculture. Just read that out. What's the Chinese for goal 2?
消除, sorry, so this part, right? 消除饥饿，实现粮食安全，改善营养状况和促进可持续农业.
Okay. Now if we go back to the Chinese.
Wait, sorry, I'm a bit.
I know. It's
so many pages. Can you see the Chinese?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
And bring those up. Okay, so the first thing I'd highlighted here was, do we have an indicator 211?
Let's see.
Okay.
Yeah.
Prevalence of undernourishment. What's that in Chinese?
营养不足发生率.
Okay, that's something that, these are quite, it's important statistical sort of vocabulary, prevalence of something.
Exactly.
Right.
I was just going to say, because you are going to mention another prevalence. Prevalence is translated differently in different contexts in Chinese.
Oh, is that right? They use different words. Okay, so that's good to know. Okay, in English we do like to say prevalence. And so undernourishment. Well, another thing I was going to say was, I didn't see it actually in the SDGs, but the opposite of undernourishment is obviously people who are overweight. Obese. And it's funny. The official word that's used in a lot of these UN documents is the problem of overweight, which is overweight used as a noun, okay, which sounds really weird as again to an English native speaker.
Yeah, obesity, but then being overweight and being obese are a bit different.
Different. Yeah, exactly. They're not quite the same thing. Yeah, and it's just to be aware of that. That overweight is used as a noun, an abstract sort of noun. So just be aware. So undernourishment, overweight. Okay. 2.2. Okay. There was a couple of some vocab here. So okay, end all forms of nutrition. Okay, stunting and wasting. What would that be in Chinese?
So stunting is 发育迟缓, wasting is 消瘦. Well, those are very specific vocabs.
Yeah.
Very specific.
Okay, so again, just be aware of those, all right? So Zoe's given you the equivalent there in Chinese. So I think so stunting is people who aren't, growing to their full height. Wasting, I guess someone's wasting away is again that's a link to undernourishment. I'm supposing.
Like scrawny.
Exactly. Good adjective. Yeah. Something okay. Lactating women.
Right. 哺乳期妇女. That's a new one on me as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is the kind of thing you'll get. I'll tell you what I get. That you get this in the Committee on Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, and then this is a big issue, when it comes to women's health and the sort of are the needs of lactating mothers, women being met. So that just means who are breastfeeding. Then in 2.2.3, again, we have another prevalence here. Prevalence of anemia. What is anemia in Chinese?
Well, it's not here. There's only 2.2.2.
It's not there. Okay.
But anemia in Chinese is 贫血.
Okay. So you'll see that in the English if you want to be tracking the English version as well at the same time if you're doing this at home. That's in 2.223, prevalence of anemia.
Yeah, but then the prevalence here is 患病率.
Different
because
word.
Anemia is a kind of like illness. So prevalence of anemia is called 贫血患病率.
Okay. Then 2.3. Small scale food producers. What do we call those in Chinese?
Wait. All right. 小规模粮食生产者.
Okay, that's something that gets talked about, a lot when it comes to agricultural issues, the idea, of smallholder farmers as well. There's these whole, when focusing on like these sort of smaller businesses, so small scale food producers, smallholder farmers, again, good vocab to know. And then we have these categories of various people, pastoralists and fishers. What are they known as?
So, pastoralist, 牧民, fisher, 渔民. Those are quite all right in Chinese.
Okay.
Yeah.
Again, a fisher is a bit of a weird word in English.
In English, it's very weird, but in Chinese, at least the Chinese translation is very natural.
Right. I mean, because we more likely to say fishermen.
Yeah.
But now they use fishers. Is that like sexist or something?
Yeah, I was thinking of that. Yeah.
Fisher persons.
Yeah, I was like
fishers. Anyway, there you go. Well, it's one. If nothing else, it's one syllable less, I guess.
Yeah.
Then what else? So in this one, okay. All the rest of that target, it's fairly straightforward. So I'm focusing on that vocab, which is a bit unusual. The rest of that target, there's quite a lot of. It's quite dense, but all those words you will more or less run across on a regular basis.
I want to point out one phrase that's kind of translated a bit unusually in Chinese.
Yep.
In the UN context, indigenous peoples.
Okay, this is very important.
土著居民. I think this only works in the UN context because the word 土著 in Chinese is a bit offensive. I don't know why they picked this for indigenous, but that's what it is. Yeah.
It's not the regular
Usually
word. It's not the regular word then for indigenous peoples then?
No, we would say so outside of the UN context, I would use 原住民. That's more respectful. 土著居民, at least just 土著 also indicates that they are a bit backward.
And do they use this? Do they use this throughout the SDGs?
Throughout the UN context.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's interesting.
That's very interesting. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say the acronym IPs, but you can use it in English. You can use IPs, you know, if you need to, if you're really behind, if you're trying to catch. I suppose, and if you're going from Chinese into English, you are going to be racing. So, you know, if you say, you know, if you want to use the acronym IPs, you know, say the first time you hear, okay, Indigenous peoples, IPs, and then you call them IPs afterwards. That's one way of, you know, saving a little bit of time.
Very much like intellectual property.
Yeah. Indigenous people are 6 syllables, so IPs saves you quite a bit of time then. Okay, 2.5.
Yeah.
This is just an interesting vocab here. Genetic diversity of seeds, cultivated plants, and farmed and domesticated animals and their related wild species. Okay, so what's all that? What's that target?
So it's here the 种子、种植作物、养殖和驯养的动物及与之相关的野生物种的基因的遗传多样性。
Okay, I'm thinking, you know, the genetic diversity of seeds, that's becoming an increasingly big issue, I've noticed with time. You know, they have you know, there's an enormous seed bank, is a bit of general knowledge for you, somewhere in Norway, Svalbard Island or something, which is meant to hold every single seed that's ever been, a sample of every single seed ever discovered.
Wow.
I believe. I have to look that up. I believe it's on the island of Svalbard, some enormous fortress that's just housing all these seeds. There you go. Okay, 2.5.2. This is just an expression, you know.
This is left in English.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Sorry.
So the reason I put this kind of, what I was you know, so okay, proportion of local breeds classified as being at risk, not at risk, or unknown level of at risk of extinction. So you know, you'll read about being at risk of extinction all the time, and but you might not in the heat of the moment. Suddenly, when you're hit with it, and you hear that whatever it is in foreign, and you're trying to put it into English, it might not. Sometimes the way it's formulated in different languages isn't a like for like at risk of extinction.
Yeah.
So you have to, you almost have to be slightly prepared that when you hear it, you know, to put it into at risk of extinction. So how does it read in Chinese?
So there's actually a very nice and idiomatic way to say that in Chinese, which is 濒临灭绝. And also notice that at risk of extinction is also often paired up with endangered.
Endangered species.
Endangered
right.
and at risk of extinction. Yeah.
And is that different? Is there a different expression in Chinese for endangered species?
Yeah, that is. I suddenly forgot it. What is that? Right. So endangered is 濒危, and at risk of extinction is 濒临灭绝. They actually also go together in Chinese. Yeah.
Okay. Then 2A. In fact, actually, this brings us back to our gene bank in Svalbard, perhaps. Okay, plant and livestock gene banks.
Yeah, so it's here. 植物和牲畜基因库.
Okay. Livestock. I mean, that's the sort of word that if you've been like doing nuclear weapons for 3 weeks, for example, and you suddenly get thrown into an SDG meeting, that sort of word might catch me out going into English, for example, livestock from another language. So that's just a sort of good basic word that you need to be comfortable with. 2A2. This is pretty straightforward. Okay, official development assistance. That's a term that's
It's
been
not
around
here,
for long.
but yeah, it's
Oh,
pretty
it's not that.
straightforward. It's 官方发展援助. And I know there's you often hear ODA, right?
ODA, and you also hear ODA, by the way. So
Oh
just be
my
careful
gosh,
for
okay.
that in English. You do
It sounds
occasionally
like
hear ODA.
ODOR, ODA.
It sounds like
Yeah. Yeah.
ODA.
Yeah, and there's a kind of like Chinese abbreviation. You can say 官发援 instead of 官方发展援助. Cut it in half.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Then 2B. Okay. Elimination of all forms of agricultural export subsidies. I mean, that's pretty straightforward vocab.
Yeah.
It's just an important subject to be, just be
Right.
familiar with the idea of exports, agricultural export subsidies. What's that in Chinese?
取消一切形式的农业出口补贴.
Okay. Okay, let's go on to goal 3 then.
Okay, let me share the English version first.
Good health and well-being. Okay, so ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all at all ages. All right, what's that in Chinese?
确保各年龄段人群的健康生活方式，促进他们的福祉.
Okay, well-being, better than welfare. Okay, welfare tends to be more associated with welfare payments, but a person's being well then is more generally well-being.
Yeah.
Now, if we go to the Chinese. So the first thing I've highlighted here is 3.1. By 2030, reduce the global maternal mortality rate to less than 70 per 100,000 live births. Now, the reason I highlighted this, it's really more to do with the figure, okay? So you'll have, again, countries coming into treaty body meetings, for example, and be telling us about how their healthcare situation has improved. And some of the sort of main indicators for that are infant mortality and maternal mortality. Now, the thing is, the infant mortality is measured in deaths per 1,000 live births. Maternal mortality, because it's much rarer, though, is measured in per 100,000 live births. So it just helps that when something like this is coming at you, a sort of minister is quoting these statistics. When he starts, for example, mentioning maternal mortality, that you know that the second figure you're going to have to deal with is the 100,000. It's just good to know these sort of benchmarks, okay? So maternal mortality is measured per 100,000 live births. Then 3.2. Okay, just a couple of deaths of newborns. Newborns. How are we? Yeah,
新生儿. Yeah.
Say again.
新生儿.
Okay, so and often these two are taken as a pair. So newborns and children under 5 years of age. I guess if you want a quick shortcut, you can just say under 5s. Again, if a speaker's going very fast, you could just say deaths of newborns and under 5s. Neonatal mortality. How are we saying that?
That's 新生儿死亡率. It's kind of like at least in this sentence, the translation kind of changes the position of the words.
Okay.
Yeah. But if you just want a neonatal mortality, then that would be 新生儿死亡率.
Okay. Then 3.1.2. I think I'm going back a little for this. Yeah, sorry. Sorry, go back to 3.1 and then 3.1. Oh, it's not here. So 3.1.2 is proportion of births attended by skilled health personnel. So that's something that's quite an important indicator that I feel that they refer to a lot, being attended in the presence of, attended by skilled personnel. Here it's skilled health personnel.
So the translation that I found is 由熟练卫生人员接生的比例.
Okay. Then 3.3. Now, there's a number of diseases and illnesses here that are important to be again, familiar with.
Mm.
AIDS, tuberculosis, malaria, neglected tropical diseases, combat hepatitis, waterborne diseases, and other communicable diseases. Okay, so are there tricky ones there then in Chinese?
Not really in Chinese, but if it's Chinese into English, I've got to think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just maybe give us the Chinese equivalent just to,
Yeah.
so we can hear it, so the listeners can, the viewers can hear it.
Yeah. 艾滋病、结核病、疟疾和被忽视的热带疾病，抗击肝炎、水传播疾病和其他传染病。Yeah, I find the communicable disease quite special that in English, because in Chinese, 传染病 is like infectious disease.
Oh, they call it more infect. Yeah, that's the thing in English, in everyday parlance, you hear more about infectious diseases.
Yeah.
Again, this communicable is something that you hear more at the UN.
Right.
I think they're more or less the same thing. I think they're very close. There's probably some sort of technical difference, but that's certainly the word they use at the UN. They talk about communicable diseases, and you'll see the next in 3.4
non-communicable,
and they talk about non-communicable diseases actually more. Some they call them NC. You'll hear NCDs used as an acronym for non-communicable diseases. Then 3.5 substance abuse.
滥用药物.
I guess it's to do with, narcotic drugs and so on. Okay, the 3.7 sexual and reproductive healthcare services. What's that in Chinese?
性健康和生殖健康保健服务.
Okay, so an important thing, you hear a lot about sexual and reproductive healthcare and rights. Often you'll hear about that being referred to as SRHR. Is that about the right acronym? SRHR, yeah, sexual reproductive healthcare and rights. Then 3.9, hazardous chemicals and air, water, and soil pollution and contamination. Remember, when you're going into English, when you're talking about chemicals, you're using more hazardous than dangerous. In Chinese, is it the same word? Or?
It's the same word, 危险化学品, yeah.
Okay. And soil pollution and contamination. Is there a difference between pollution and contamination?
No. So that's only 污染. So 污染 covers both pollution and contamination. Like you will call it air pollution, but you don't call it air contamination, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
But in Chinese, it's the same thing. Like
Okay.
we use the same word, I should say. 空气污染 is air pollution, and 土壤污染 that's soil contamination.
Okay. Just one thing I'd say here about the word soil. So coming from my other languages, there might be an inclination to say earth pollute. Often the word for earth and soil are the same in many languages. So when you're going into English, you really want to make sure you're saying soil as opposed to earth, because earth lends itself to confusion. So
yeah,
is it in Chinese the same word for earth and soil?
Nope.
Oh, you got two different words there.
Two different words.
Oh, okay. So maybe that makes things a bit easier in terms of compartmentalizing them. Okay, 3B, Doha Declaration on TRIPS, TRIPS Agreement in Public Health. So this acronym we run into sometimes when talking about trade. So trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights. What would that be in Chinese?
So TRIPS is 关于与贸易有关的知识产权协议. But you can just say TRIPS.
You can call them TRIPS.
You can actually call them TRIPS. And I actually spent like 2 weeks on TRIPS at my university. So doing speeches related to TRIPS.
Really?
Not really fun. Not fun at all.
From WIPO or?
No, WTO. WTO related, okay. So like Doha round, that kind of stuff.
Okay. I get you.
Yeah.
What's WIPO, by the way, in Chinese?
Is it 世界知识产权组织, I think. Yeah.
Okay, the World Intellectual Property Organization. So that's a bit of becoming increasingly a big player. Okay, let's go to goal 4.
You see it?
Yep. Okay. So goal 4, quality education, ensure inclusive, equitable quality education, promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. How do you say that in Chinese? Lifelong learning opportunities. That's a
终
sort of
身学
concept that
习机
gets.
会，终身学习 lifelong learning.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
quite useful little expression to be familiar with. Sometimes you'll see, they talk about often lifelong learning, continuous learning, on the job learning, when they're talking about opportunities offered to members of the public, who are in terms of furthering their careers. So that's a good sort of little set of to know in English: lifelong learning, continuous learning, on the job learning, etc. So the first one here, 4.1, okay, free, equitable, quality primary and secondary education. That's just, to be aware that that's the UN. They tend to sort of here go more with British English, the vocabulary, primary and secondary education, as opposed to, I think you can say, I mean, if you prefer American, elementary and I don't even know what the Americans call it. They've got secondary education, elementary and secondary.
I don't know. I don't call it middle school, right?
Middle, I don't know.
Middle
I'm not
school.
certain. In Chinese, is there anything tricky with
There's
that,
no
or is it
difference.
fairly
中
straightforward?
小学. So so in Chinese, the order is actually secondary and primary, not primary and secondary. It's just the collocation.
Really?
Yeah, that is it's not 小中学, it's 中小学. It's collocation.
Okay.
That's how it is.
Right. Then 4.1.2. This is just interest. The
It's not
completion. It's not there. Okay.
It's
So
not here.
4.1.2 is the completion rate. That's based, and that refers to people completing their education as opposed to the dropout rate. So you want to remember those two sort of antonyms as a package, because again, if you'll have it, for example, again, this might be a committee on the rights of the child. Minister comes and is talking about, again, how wonderful the country's education system is and how much the completion rate has increased and how low the dropout rate has dropped. So yeah, completion rate versus dropout rate.
Yeah,
What
so
would those be in
completion
Chinese?
rate, it's actually a direct translation, just 完成率. Dropout rate is 辍学率.
Okay.
Yeah.
Next, 4.3. So technical, vocational, and tertiary education. Just important sort of vocab here that,
yeah,
again,
技术、职业和高等教育.
So I guess vocational is, to do with actually acquiring a trade. Tertiary education is university. Yeah. So it's good to be just, again, comfortable with those ideas. 4.6.1.
Yeah.
Okay, sort of statistical vocab here. Okay, proportion of population in a given age group achieving at least a fixed level of proficiency in functional literacy and numeracy skills. How do we talk about proficiency in literacy and numeracy skills?
So proficiency, it's more like 能力. Oh, I guess like level of proficiency and skills are kind of merged in the Chinese translation.
Okay.
You don't need to translate it as in word for word. It's implied in this 能力 or 水平. Yeah.
Okay.
So literacy is 识字, numeracy is 识数.
Okay. You tend to hear literacy more talked about, but again, yeah, I both are important to know. Then 4A, we have, okay, build and upgrade education facilities that are child, disability, and gender sensitive. There's our gender sensitive again. Provide safe, non-violent, inclusive, and effective learning environments for all. So just some sort of boilerplate UN language here. Upgrade how are we upgrading education facilities in Chinese? What's the word they've used for there?
So it's 改善, I believe. Yeah. So it's like improve.
Okay.
Literally, yeah.
Disability and gender sensitive.
Disability, 残疾. Gender sensitive here is actually translated as 性别平等, so gender equity.
Okay. Okay. Then, okay, 4B, enrollment in higher education. That's another one actually that sort of goes with completion and dropout. Enrollment is an important, again, similar concept. How's that
So
done in Chinese?
I was looking at it, but I can't find it in the. Are you sure this is in the English version? Let me check.
4B, yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I've got written here. But, I mean,
this is not really in the Chinese version. The Chinese version talks about scholarships, right? Because the English version is also about scholarships.
What scholarships in
so
Chinese?
奖学金.
Okay, that's an important word in itself, actually. So again, there might be a bit of a discrepancy between the English version and the Chinese version, which is why sometimes we don't always have the same thing here. But
if enrollment is 入学 enrollment rate 入学率.
Enrollment rate, okay. That's
so like you attend a university, right?
Okay, yeah.
It's 入学,
yeah. Okay, goal 5.
Right.
Gender equality. Let's bring up the full name in English.
Yeah.
Achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. That's a very important word. Okay, empowerment. Okay, how's that done in Chinese? How does that read in Chinese?
实现性别平等，增强所有妇女和女童的权能.
Okay, female empowerment. One thing you heard about a lot, and you don't hear it as much recently. Gender mainstreaming. They love gender mainstreaming. How was that done in Chinese?
I think it's translated literally. So 性别主流 or 性别主流化.
Okay.
Yeah.
It was better. Gender mainstreaming is basically a synonym of empowerment. So
I see.
Yeah.
The term is actually quite confusing. What does it mean to mainstream the gender?
Mainstream. What does it actually? Don't start to think of, because then it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. So perhaps it's no point, best not to even think about it and just accept it for what it is. Because if you think about it, your brain might explode.
Yeah.
Gender mainstreaming, because gender was never mainstream before.
What is a mainstream gender?
I don't know anymore.
Exactly.
Let's move on.
Right.
Let's see, where are we? Okay. 5.2.1. Okay.
Let's see if it's here.
An interesting expression here.
Yep, it's here.
Ever partnered women and girls. That's unusual. Yeah. What's that? How's that done in Chinese?
So the Chinese one is quite idiomatic. 有过伴侣的妇女和女童. Yeah.
I mean, I must admit, I don't think I've ever used that in the heat of battle myself, ever partnered. But there you go, it's there, and now you'll know. Now you'll recognize it if you ever get hit with it. Okay. Former intimate partner. Is there anything special? Any special term they use there?
That's quite usual, I'd say.
Okay, an intimate. Yeah, I mean, in English, it's not that usual, but there you go. That's the word. That's the expression they've gone for. Okay, now 5.3 is an important one. These ideas here: early and forced marriage and female genital mutilation.
Yeah, 早婚、逼婚及割礼.
Okay, and so female genital mutilation will often hear the acronym FGM. That's something you have to again. It's mainly a phenomenon, I guess, in Africa, parts of Asia as well. Okay, then 5.4.1, unpaid domestic and care work. That's again becoming more of an issue these days. How's that done in Chinese?
无薪酬家务和护理工作.
Okay. I guess you get a lot of this perhaps in Middle Eastern countries, the richer sort of Middle Eastern countries. We have, like, I don't know, women brought in from countries like Bangladesh, the Philippines, Nepalese, working very low cost and very poor conditions. That's when that sort of issue that might get brought up, for example, again in the CEDAW or Committee on Migrant Workers. That's like what the newest treaty body. You see, Committee on Migrant Workers. They're protecting the rights of migrant workers and the members of their families. So I've heard this sort of theme raised there. 5.5.1. This is a thing that the country's ministers will love to talk about. What percentage of women occupy seats in parliament or in government, etc. So proportion of seats held by women in national parliaments and local governments. Anything vocabulary-wise, anything unusual there in Chinese, or is it straightforward?
Oh, I think it's pretty straightforward. Yeah.
Okay. It's just being ready when you're going into English with the wording, 40% of parliamentary seats are held by women. It's just having it. It seems easy just to say it now, but that's the sort of thing that you can find even me as an English speaker, native speaker, sort of tripping up on when I'm trying to express that idea. So
yeah, I guess maybe if that's one thing, it's how to translate seats here.
Okay.
It's 席位. Yeah. So this is like what is used in this context.
Okay. Yeah, because I mean, maybe in other languages they may talk about positions. It might be the word for positions, and that sounds a bit weird going into English, saying the number of positions held. I mean, I don't know what the word is in Chinese, but yeah, seats is really the best word when it comes to elected officials.
Yeah, 席位. So the Chinese word, it's like a combination of positions and seats.
Okay. Yeah. Then 5.6. Okay. Again, we're talking here about sexual reproductive health and reproductive rights, SRHR, as we spoke of earlier. Then, okay, this conference comes up sometimes, the International Conference on Population and Development, the ICPD. You may run into that. What's that in Chinese?
国际人口与发展会议行动纲领.
Okay, so that would be the POA of the ICPD. Then the Beijing Platform for Action, outcome documents of their review conferences. This is sort of bureaucratic vocabulary, but it's useful to be able, you want to be able to reel it off without too much difficulty. How would you say that in Chinese?
审查会议的成果文件.
Okay. Okay. Beijing Platform for Action, and does that go? The BPOA.
That is actually quite common. Beijing.
Yeah. The Beijing Platform for Action.
It's often mentioned.
Yeah, gets referenced a lot. So be familiar with
it. Yeah, especially for Chinese representatives tend to say that in Chinese, and you've got to render that into English. Yeah. That's Beijing in it.
Okay, then 5B, just interesting word, enabling technology. That's interesting English vocabulary.
This is completely not translated in Chinese. Yeah, I checked several versions and it just left out because I think the meaning is here. Because there's like empowerment here. So enabling and empowerment are kind of like the same thing. Yeah, so it's moved to the empowerment part, so just like 增强全能. Yeah.
Okay. Enabling, conducive, these are good synonyms. Okay. Then on to the goal 6. Okay, and the full wording: ensure availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all. What's that in Chinese?
为所有人提供水和环境卫生，并对其进行可持续管理.
Okay, so the first thing I've got noted here, 6.1, safe and affordable drinking water for all. What's that in Chinese?
Let me reshare.
Okay.
Yeah, wait a sec. 安全和负担得起的饮用水.
So I think
affordable, yeah.
Yeah, I think the reason I highlighted this, sometimes you'll hear potable, okay? You'll hear potable water. Potable, Potable. That's taken from the French. It's about l'eau potable, and often in English you'll hear potable, as in that means safe drinking water. Okay, so be on the lookout for that word. Then 6.2, okay, end open defecation. How is that rendered in Chinese?
杜绝露天排便。
Okay, this is quite an important health issue.
Right.
I think, especially in country, I don't know. Having been to India,
Yeah, I was going to say.
yeah, been on trains going through the Indian countryside and looking out 6 o'clock in the morning, and you know what the panorama looks like, right? So that's a big issue in the certainly in the third world.
Right.
6.3. Okay, eliminate dumping and minimizing release of hazardous chemicals and materials. Okay, how do we dump dumping.
Yeah, so it's quite specific in Chinese.
Speaking of open-ended definitions.
Dumping. Well, it's a bit different. Yeah. 倾倒废物. So literally dumping waste, dumping garbage. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Chemicals in this case, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And then untreated wastewater. That's again an important idea.
未经处理废水.
Okay. And then these concepts, recycling and reuse. How are we going to do that?
回收再利用.
Okay, so there is a difference, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not entirely, I guess reuse is you use the same, which I don't know. I'm not entirely certain what the difference is between recycling.
I mean, recycle
means it gets broken up and down and then made into a different product.
If it's made into something else, and reuse is like maybe I don't even recycle it. I just reuse like a bottle, a plastic bottle. I just reuse it without recycling it. But then if you recycle it, then make it into something else.
They can make it into something else. I think you're exactly. I think that's exactly that. Yeah. 6.5.2. Okay, proportion of transboundary basin areas with an operational arrangement for water cooperation. This is an important concept increasingly. Okay, transboundary basins, like when you have a body of water, maybe more than 2, 3 or more countries bordering that same water source, and often these lakes generally, for example,
like the Great Lake. Region, right, in Africa.
Exactly. There'll be a transboundary basin organization that manages the use of the resources provided by that body of water. So it's just important. What's that in Chinese? Transboundary basin.
Yeah, 跨界流域.
Okay, so this came up a lot. For example, I remember when I went to a conference in Astana 2017 on water, and that's a huge issue, as I say, trying to promote cooperation of these transboundary basin organizations. You have Lake Chad, the various rivers, like Lake Niger, was it the Niger Delta River Basin Organization? Lots of them. Then going on, 6.6. Okay, some features here that you want to know. Okay, mountains and forests are presumably straightforward, but wetlands and aquifers. How do we do those in Chinese?
Wetlands is actually a direct translation. 湿地, which is also quite not unusual in Chinese. Aquifers is 含水层. I think this is more technical. It's not really everyday Chinese.
Right, those are very important, especially I guess in the Middle East and more sort of dry, where they suffer from droughts. The idea of aquifers, so these are important. Topographical features. Is that the word I was looking for, perhaps? 6A. Okay, some important technologies here. Okay, water harvesting, desalination, water efficiency, wastewater treatment, recycling and reuse technologies. I've come across pretty much all of those. How do we do those in Chinese?
Right. 雨水采集、海水淡化、提高用水效率、废水处理、水回收和再利用技术.
Okay, I know desalination plants, for example, big issue again in the Gulf, where there's very little in the way of fresh water and turning all that seawater into potable water. That's a big issue. And generally water these days is a big thing. 7, okay, that's 6. Let's go on to goal 7. Okay, goal 7 then, affordable and clean energy. Ensure access to affordable, reliable, sustainable and modern energy for all.
确保人人获得负担得起的可靠和可持续的现代能源。
Okay. Surprisingly, I haven't actually highlighted too much from this goal. It's perhaps I think the vocabulary under this goal is pretty straightforward. There's not too much unusual stuff. But the first thing I had was 7A. No, I tell a lie. 7.2. Okay, increase by 2030. Increase substantially the share of renewable energy in the global energy mix. Is this either the global energy mix? That's a very important concept. How do we do that in Chinese?
全球能源结构。
Okay, and renewable energy?
可再生能源。
Okay, useful shortcut you'll find that when talking about renewable forms of energy, you just call them renewables. Going into English. You don't need to say, I don't know if in Chinese there's like more than one word to express it, but in English, you just call them,
there's actually,
we need to move to renewables.
Yeah, there's actually a shorter version. It's called 新能源, which is, I think, more colloquial. It's also more often used in, well, all sorts of discourse. And sometimes people translate that as new energy, but really that's renewables.
Renewable energy, okay. Then 7A, we've got renewable energy, energy efficiency, and advanced and cleaner fossil fuel technology. So cleaner fossil fuel technology. How are we going to do that?
Yeah, so that's 更清洁的化石燃料技术.
Okay, often that will often cleaner, greener, more or less synonyms in this context. You'll hear both. Was it? Yeah. Do they use like in Chinese green, like as in the color to describe these phenomena?
Yeah, it's the same. Yeah.
Then 7B1. Okay, installed renewable energy generating capacity in developing countries. How are we going to render that? Installed renewable energy generating capacity.
Right. So this is lesson in English on this website, but the translation would be 可再生能源发电装机容量, because installed capacity is 装机容量in Chinese.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's just useful to know, again, the collocation energy generating, that is the best collocation to go with energy in this context. By the way, one thing that is mentioned a lot in these goals you'll see in the English, which I haven't actually included in these main things, are these groups of countries that are affected. The LDCs, okay, the least developed countries.
The SIDS, right?
SIDS, that small island developing states. Just tell me what those are what are LDCs and SIDS in Chinese?
LDC is less developing countries, right?
Least developed countries.
Least 最不发达国家. SIDS refer to 小岛屿发展中国家.
Okay.
Basically, you've got to be quick when say those things in Chinese.
Yeah. No acronyms, huh?
Or you can just use the English acronym if you really don't have time.
Right.
Because I guess everyone knows it. Yeah.
Because when the SDGs, when they talk about
SDGs, you can
for
definitely.
the most part they will reference the situation in reference to what the situation is in LDCs and SIDS. So it's it's important that you can spot these groups. You also have middle income countries, which is another group that they.
中等收入国家.
You have them talking about the mix. Like people,
I've heard of that. Yeah,
it's not impossible that you might run into that when referring to middle income countries. Okay. In watts per capita, again, that's a good measurement just to be sort of familiar with when talking about the capacity generation. Okay, watts per capita. How do we say that?
So a direct translation would be 人均瓦特, but I guess. So when you translate that into Chinese, it really depends on the context, and you kind of need to break it up. It's kind of, I want to insert a number there. Without a number, it feels like a bit strange. But because this is just a unit, of watts and just 瓦特.
Yeah.
And per
Because
capita
I'm guessing that the
yeah.
highest watts per capita, probably, I don't know. I'd say China probably has the greatest aggregate overall number of watts, but whereas for watts per capita, they probably come down lower.
Yeah.
I don't know, might be that America would perhaps have the highest, or the
Likely,
Gulf
yeah.
states. I don't know. The Gulf, I mean, all the Gulf states always tend to top those rankings. Anyway, so then that's goal 7. Moving on to goal 8. Goal 8: decent work and economic growth. Promote sustained, inclusive and sustainable economic growth, full and productive employment, and decent work for all. So that's use. Decent work is it's important you get the right English collocation, because in some languages coming into English, you might think, dignified work, like the Russian, for example, is the word you initially think of, maybe dignified work, but in English you want to be saying decent work. So I don't know, in Chinese, is it straightforward?
I'll just read the Chinese translation first. 促进持久包容和可持续经济增长，促进充分的生产性就业和人人获得体面工作。Decent work. Because I feel like this term often appears in English, so I find decent work quite common. But I used to have trouble translating into Chinese. So how to go from decent work into Chinese. Because 体面工作 is not that common. Yeah.
But that's the expression they use at the UN, right?
That is the expression used in the UN, yeah.
Okay. So you want to try and make sure you're using that expression.
Yeah.
That's going to might give you an extra brownie point if you ever do an exam, for example. Okay, then we go to 8.2. Okay, achieve high levels of economic productivity through diversification, technological upgrading and innovation, including through a focus on high value added and labor intensive sectors. So how are we doing like technological upgrading and innovation? Upgrading is a very important word to have generally.
So here,
in English,
upgrading, it's like literal upgrading, 技术升级, innovation is 创新. Yeah.
And high value added and labor intensive sectors.
高附加值和劳动密集型行业. Those are very, very common.
Okay. I mean, in English, you hear, there's a lot of value added to be had there, or there's a lot of added value. You can actually use either way. You can say added value or value added. You can use both in English. And labor intensive is a good sort of snappy term. I don't know, in Chinese, do they have is it like 2 words as well, or is it
labor intensive? Is exactly the same as in English.
That's handy then. Okay. Then in 8.3, we have micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, known often as MSMEs. You'll sometimes hear, sometimes you just hear SMEs, small and medium-sized, but also more recently they've started talking about micro as well. So MSMEs. What's that in Chinese?
So here it's translated as 微型和中小型企业, which is kind of like micro, then middle and small. So the middle and small are kind of linked together. But I checked the UN website for micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. There's actually just like one phrase in Chinese that cover all, 中小微企业. And this phrase is kind of quite popular in Chinese as well. Yeah.
Okay. Then in 8.4, decouple economic growth from environmental degradation. So what are they going with decouple? That's a concept that's becoming increasingly widely used.
Yeah. 使经济增长和环境退化脱钩. So the translation of decoupling is exactly the same as economic decoupling. Yeah.
It's the same idea, is it, in Chinese?
Yeah,
Is it
same
English?
idea,
Okay,
same
okay.
translation, economic
Again, it's a
capital.
word I'd very rarely use in everyday spoken English, but again,
Yeah.
it's a concept you hear a lot at the UN these days. And then environmental degradation. Is this the word degradation? That seems to be the sort of favored collocation when it comes to environment. So not deterioration, but specifically I mean, okay, deterioration's okay, but if you really want to impress someone, environmental degradation is the word that you want. And in Chinese, is there anything? Is that fairly straightforward?
Yeah, I think it's a direct translation of degradation, 退化，环境退化。Yeah.
Okay. Then 8.4.1. Just the idea of footprints, material footprint per capita, material footprint per GDP. Often you hear carbon footprint again. So just what's that in Chinese?
So carbon footprint is 碳足迹. Here material footprint, well, same concept. 物质足迹.
It's the same word for footprint, right?
Same word for footprint, just replace 碳 with 物质. Yeah.
Okay. Again, commonly used concept, right? Then 8.5. Okay, this is a bit of a sort of cliche, whatever. It's a bit of a motto: equal pay for work of equal value. How do they do that in Chinese? That's an important,
just 4 characters. 同工同酬.
Okay, it's good. I mean, again, just as an English speaker, it's good to just know that. For me, off by heart, almost equal pay for work of equal value, because you can almost predict it when in certain contexts. Again, for example, if you're in a CDOR meeting and then the minister's stressing the importance of women getting paid the same amount, and you know they're going to talk about equal pay for work of equal value. So it's good to have that sort of by heart, to know that by heart. Then 8.7. Okay. Let's see. Effective measures to eradicate forced labor, end modern slavery and human trafficking. Okay, well, let's start with that. Eradicate forced labor and end modern slavery and human trafficking.
根除强制劳动、现代奴隶制和贩卖人口.
Okay, same words: trafficking, smuggling. Is there one word for, like, for example, we'll talk about human trafficking, but we'll talk about
But you
more,
wouldn't say human smuggling, right? Would you say human?
Less so.
But you would say smuggler.
You could, but you tend to smuggle.
Yeah, goods,
drugs,
right?
more goods.
Yeah. So if it's about human, then that's
if it's about
definitely
humans and that you're at
贩卖.
you're at an international organization, you really want to be using trafficking. That's kind of
because smuggling in Chinese, especially when it comes to drugs, that would be 毒品走私.
Okay.
Or 贩运, but not 贩卖. 贩卖, that's quite specific. It's probably like human trafficking. Yeah.
I think trafficking is perhaps also a more on a wider level. If I was to
a more general term, right?
Yeah, if it's one person, I don't know, I'd smuggle a person into somewhere.
Right.
But if it's my business, if it's my actual trade, I would probably be known as a people trafficker, human trafficker, whatever. You also have for guns. You can, not gun running. That's an old expression that sometimes gets used. Not actually heard at the UN, but if you ever hear about gun running,
I have no idea what that is.
Smuggling. I mean, smuggling guns across borders. Although with weapons, it tends to be arms trafficking, probably. Trafficking probably with weapons. Okay, elimination of the worst forms of child labor, recruitment and use of child soldiers. What's that in Chinese?
Right. 招募和利用童兵.
Okay. Again, this is a phenomenon I think that's particularly troublesome.
ISIS, right?
Well, exactly. In the Middle East, in Africa, the phenomenon of child soldiers. This is the kind of thing that will get security council. I seem to remember that would get raised a lot. Committee on the Rights of the Child. Yeah. Then 8.8. Precarious employment. That was just an interesting use of precarious. You hear that for those of you with French in your combination, you'll know how much the French love talking about la précarité. They're always about précarité of jobs, and it always proves something of a challenge of how to best render it into English. Usually I'll go with insecurity, job insecurity. But I notice here that they've gone, okay, so precarious employment. Is there anything strange in the Chinese?
So the Chinese translation is quite idiomatic, 没有稳定工作, but that literally means without a secured job.
Okay, so yeah, I see.
So it's more like the English, like job insecurity.
They prefer, yeah, exactly. See, to me, precarious employment sounds a bit French, to be honest. But yeah, I think we'd more like to talk about job insecurity. But, right. And then 8A1, aid for trade commitments and disbursements. Some interesting vocab. What's aid for trade?
促贸援助协议. This is a new one on me. Yeah.
Oh, you've not heard? Yeah, you run into that. Yeah. I mean, it's quite in English because it rhymes, so it's quite easy to sort of remember.
Yeah.
It's a mechanism that does get mentioned sometimes. Commitments and disbursements, again, so bureaucratic language, but good to know. So how would you?
Yeah. 承付款和支付的款项. So I think those are definitely new concepts. For me, because commitment here means the money that they actually
pledges. Yeah, right? Exactly.
They pledge.
Financial
and disbursement is like how much they actually pay.
Spend, how much they. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so there's a discrepancy between the two.
Yep. That's it. Commitment is basically how much we're going to pay you this much, and that's it. And then how much they actually pay.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the final one for today's episode, goal 9.
Right.
Industry, innovation, and infrastructure. Okay, build resilient infrastructure. There's our resilient again. Promote inclusive and sustainable industrialization and foster innovation. How's that in Chinese?
建造具备抵御灾害能力的基础设施，促进具有包容性的可持续工业化，推动创新。
Okay, it's interesting. They've gone for fostering innovation. Often they'll talk about promoting innovation. So that's a nice synonym there for you. Promote, foster. And then we want 9.1.2.
Yeah.
And what was interesting here? Okay, passenger and freight volumes. Freight. Important word to know. When you talk about transport, this is the kind of thing that might get mentioned, for example, at the UNEC, the Economic Commission for Europe, when this is a big issue, talking about various modes of transport. That's good with the other part, and how many passengers they carry, or how much freight they carry, which, so how do they distinguish between passenger and freight?
So, 客运和货运量, or 客运量, 货运量. Yeah.
Okay, and a mode of transport?
运输方式.
Okay, so in English, so it's not means of transport. I mean, you can say means of transport, but yeah, you'll often hear mode. By which mode of transport? They'll talk about multimodal They'll talk about a multimodal carriage of goods, for example. It means like goods being shipped using different forms of transport. Okay, multimodal. Okay, then 9.3.2. Just
not here.
Not here. A loan or line of credit. Talks about proportion of small-scale industries with a loan or line of credit. How do we talk about a loan or a line of credit?
Yeah, because they are quite similar. To be honest, I don't know the difference, but I can give.
I think a loan is okay. I'm going to give you them. There's the money. Bang! I'm giving you.
But you still need to pay it back, right?
Yeah. But the line of credit is like a guarantee. So I think the loan is more upfront, is like more physical, whereas the line of credit, this is basically the pledge, the promise that, the guarantee that you will get the money from a bank, whatever.
I have no idea, but loan in Chinese is 贷款, line of credit is 信贷.
Okay. I think line of credit, I mean, I was going to say it's more from banks, but I mean, they're pretty similar, but yeah, it's just good to know that. I think there may be a technical difference that might be important. And then finally, 9.4, by 2030, upgrade, here we go, upgrade infrastructure, retrofit industries to make them sustainable with increased resource use efficiency. How we retrofitting industries?
Retrofit is 改进 I think yeah 改进工业以提升其可持续性 yeah
Okay, adoption of clean and environmentally sound technologies.
采用清洁和环保技术及产业流程
Okay, so clean and green again are pretty much synonyms in this with this kind of thing. And then the respective capabilities. That's interesting because one of the I noticed this. I was at a meeting in Bonn when I met Zoe a month ago in Bonn, and one of the sort of issues it was like the to do with the climate change conference, the sort of midterm COP, if you like. One of the big things they were talking about is common
but
differentiated responsibilities.
Yeah.
And that's now added on to the end of that. So that is used as an acronym, right? Common, but CBDR,
yeah.
hyphen RC.
Oh my gosh.
Capabilities.
Oh
so
gosh.
that's a new thing, and that's why I just thought it was interesting. What's that in Chinese? Respective capabilities.
It's 根据自身能力
Okay, so just be aware of over here. CBR, we need to ensure that we fully implement CBDR RC. That's what the RC will stand for, respective capabilities. Do they do anything with? Do they turn that into an acronym in Chinese?
CBDR 没有共同带有区别的责任
Okay.
But I think if you talk about CBDR, those technocrats will know.
Yeah, exactly. And sorry, so last but not least, a 9B, again, just a little bit of similar to what I had earlier. This is conducive policy environment. So just to say, conducive, enabling, good pair of synonyms. Same word here as before?
有利的政策环境
Okay.
So here, because you're talking about like something broader, the environment. So in Chinese, you can say 有利. But just now, enabling technology, that was completely left out from the translations, not translated, or it's kind of, at least not a word-for-word translation, because you can't usually use 有利 for technology. So not this Chinese word for technology to mean the same thing.
Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, it's just like collocation, and it really depends on the context.
Okay. Okay, well, that's all for today. We've done 9. We've got 8 to go. The last 8 SDGs, which me and Zoe will hopefully be doing in the next episode. Zoe, anything particularly new that you've learned then from these first 9? Anything that you think will hold you in good stead?
Actually, a lot, because first of all, I didn't know there are indicators to those goals and targets. I know there are targets, but I have no idea about the indicators.
Okay.
Yeah, and I thought I was quite good at the SDGs, but I only know the goals. I don't really know all the nitty-gritty details of the targets, not to mention the indicators. And I feel like there are some phrases that I probably need to remember. Yeah, not just for UN meetings, because I'm not working for the UN at all. But I've encountered SDG themes or topics in conferences for NGOs. And
okay, all that stuff gets referenced, right?
Yeah, exactly.
There you go. So it's not just if you're going to come to the UN. This kind of stuff is prevalent in lots of different organizations, lots of different environments. Okay, Zoe. Well, that, as I say, is all for today's episode. I'll let you say goodbye in Chinese to your fellow Chinese viewers.
Right. 那我们这次节目呢就到这边结束了。感谢大家的收看。
What did you say?
I just said that thank you for watching this episode, and we're kind of like this is the end of the episode. Probably I should add that 别忘了点赞、评论、转发、关注 like, subscribe, comment.
Please do comment. Yes, absolutely. If you've learned, let us know what you've learned. If you've learned something new from today's episode, please do put it in the comments. If there's any other ideas of your own that you would like to share with us, please also feel free to share. I love the comments. Love getting the comments. Guys, that's all for today's episode. So all that remains for me to say then is we'll put the links in the description box, by the way, so that you can have easy access, so that you can go and look up the goals yourself. Yes, all that remains to be said is then that episode 187 of the Interpretation Station stands adjourned.